In the middle of the Indian Ocean, more than 1,000 miles from the nearest continental landmass,
Come on to the port side.
the research vessel Golden Shadow reaches paradise. For the scientists aboard, it's a moment they've been waiting for. A chance to explore a world almost empty of human impact, but full of life. They're hoping these flourishing reefs will reveal secrets of how other reefs can survive the looming onslaught of climate change. But what they find challenges their expectations, both in the sea and on land. Their amazing journey offers new insights into the dangers facing coral reefs worldwide.
How does it look in there?
The ship's captain negotiates a shallow pass into a lagoon. Most of their destination, the Chagos archipelago, is underwater.
On that course again where it was shallow, and just double check every spot.
This is a major stop for the Global Reef Expedition, an ambitious mission undertaken by the Khalid bin Sultan Living Oceans Foundation. For 5 years, scientists aboard the Golden Shadow are circling the globe, seeking to better understand coral reefs and what we can do to help them survive. Reefs worldwide are increasingly endangered. Local stressors like overfishing, pollution, and coastal development constantly threaten most of them. The added pressures of climate change are now pushing reefs toward extinction. On their stay here in Chagos, the scientists will study these healthy reefs as a test case.
It's almost like a small laboratory for us. To come here is a very special occasion as part of the Global Reef Expedition, so that we can really finally understand how the global stressors are impacting even the most remote ecosystems.
The Chagos archipelago is indeed remote. A British territory, it's comprised mostly of reefs, with 60 small islands scattered in the middle of the Indian Ocean. In 2010, the UK designated Chagos and 370 kilometers around it as a no-take marine protected area, closed to commercial fishing. It's the largest area of its kind on Earth. The next morning, the team starts at first light. Their agenda is ambitious. In the next 4 weeks, they'll dive 3 times a day, thoroughly documenting 12 locations in the reefs. Coral reef ecologist Alex Dempsey has been on every mission since the project began. She's thrilled to be here in Chagos.
It is really an extraordinary place, and it's one of the last untouched places really in the ocean. Anything from 100% coral cover, meaning that the corals are actually taking up 100% of the sea floor.
This site alone is astounding. Alex has never seen more than 60% coral cover in diving all around the world.
We found corals intermixed with seagrasses, which is unusual here in the Indian Ocean. We've also seen a variety of different sponges, different anemones.
The fish life, too, is amazingly abundant. from big groupers and snappers that cruise in and out, to many thousands of smaller fish that graze on the reef. Scientists estimate that Chagos has 6 times more fish than other areas in the Indian Ocean. While the rest of his colleagues explore the reefs, Sam Purkis is focusing his research on the islands of Chagos.
Actually, I'm a bit worried about this one. I think to the left, I think. There's one.
Sam is the only team member who's been here before, 10 years ago.
Chagos is one of a kind. It's fabulously remote, and if you want to observe a natural or tropical island behaving naturally, the Chagos is the only place in the world really you can come to.
Sam's other role on the expedition is to make large-scale digital maps of the coral reefs.
The problem with coral reefs is they're obscured from casual view, so very difficult to understand and indeed to conserve, because unless you know what you've got, it's very difficult to conserve it. And so the majority of my work is using high technology, satellites, sometimes aircraft, to make maps of coral reefs and to assess their status and then track them through time.
When it comes to time, Sam often takes the long view. As a geologist, he knows the islands are just an extension of the reefs.
All of the animals and plants on the reef, many of them produce calcium carbonate skeletons. And if we look at this sand, we see it's composed of fragments of coral reef, bits of mollusk, fragments of algae as well. We start with just the reef flat submerged, and then that sand will slowly start to build up, and eventually you'll get the beginnings of an island.
As the days unfold, the team continues to survey a variety of locations throughout the reefs. They note every type of coral, from exquisite lace-like gorgonians to fields of staghorn coral and native species like the Chagos brain coral. Others document the organisms that depend on the reef. A quarter of all fish in the sea spend part of their lives on coral reefs. Though reefs themselves take up less than 0.1% of the ocean floor, these vibrant communities are vital to maintaining life in our seas. Many of the divers have spent years documenting threatened and even dead coral reefs worldwide. Overgrown with algae, they are empty, eerie places, devoid of the life they once nurtured. The contrast here in Chagos is amazing. This paradise is a reminder of what healthy coral reefs should be.
Yeah, different colors. It was beautiful.
Fantastic. Every dive is something different. You never know what to expect every time you jump in. It's great.
Yep, there's all the data. And 400 points every day.
But as time goes on, the scientists grow uneasy. The sun is unrelenting. The air, perfectly still. No sign of a breeze. The water feels like a bath. It's exceptionally warm, 30 degrees centigrade or 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And while comfortable for the divers, it's starting to trigger an ominous change in the corals. Many of them are beginning to lose their color.
So there's big changes occurring. We're seeing this active bleaching event happening right in front of our eyes.
Few people have ever seen the precise moment when corals bleach or lose their color. But the scientists know only too well the meaning of what they're looking at.
Even here in one of the most remote coral reef atolls of the world, we're seeing damage to the reefs because of the atmosphere and the climate change.
In the shallower waters of the lagoon, temperatures are higher still. And here, they find an even more extraordinary sight. It's almost as if the corals are turning to candy.
This is a stress response of the corals. The corals are at the top of their temperature range, and the photosynthesis is going haywire right now.
Photosynthesis is the key to life in a coral reef. Corals are made up of tiny animals, or polyps. Normally, they have no color, or very little. They get their customary brown or green tones from algae that live within them. Most of the time, it's a perfect symbiotic relationship. The algae convert energy from the sun to feed the polyps that build the reef. But now, the conditions are pushing photosynthesis into overdrive. The algae that give the corals life are turning toxic. When the corals expel their poisonous algae, they lose their color and bleach. If the heat continues, the corals will die.
Corals have bleached throughout the ages because of a number of factors. But we know for a fact that these cycles are becoming more and more frequent. The periodicity is becoming more frequent. And so that's quite alarming to us.
The dangers of climate change also motivate Sam's research on the islands of Chagos. Right now, life goes on as it has since this little island was born. Scores of seabirds breed, undisturbed by humans. But all around them, the island is changing. Sam is documenting the change, pacing the sands with his GPS.
It's a big question at the moment on how these low-lying tropical islands are going to persist into the future with rising sea level. Are they going to stay where they are, or are they going to erode?
It's a big question because many islands like this are full of people. Chagos is like a lab for Sam, where he can research this critical issue without constraints. But to do so, he needed good data sampled over time. Sam gained special access to aerial photographs of the archipelago from the 1970s. He's comparing them with his own recent satellite images, but he's finding some challenges.
In order to conduct this comparative study between the old photographs and the new satellite imagery, we have to define what is a coastline, because that's the line we're going to look to see if it's wobbling and changing through time.
It may seem obvious, but Sam has several choices about where exactly the coastline is.
You could take the tidal mark, but of course with high and low tide it's not very accurate. So the line we choose is this transition from the vegetated interior of the island to the bright beach sand. So this is what we call the brown beach line.
But there's a problem. The satellite photos look straight down, where palm trees obscure the brown beach line.
So what I do is I come into the field, I've got a very accurate GPS unit, and I walk around the entire perimeter of the island as closely as I can, following this brown soil line. And with that, we've got our datum against which we can compare for change.
After he makes his careful circle of the island, Sam can't resist the urge to venture inside the tree line. He soon discovers he's got company.
Okay, I've got to be a little bit careful here, because what we've found is the world's largest terrestrial arthropod, the coconut crab. And you can see her in her nest. She's critically endangered throughout the Indian Ocean because people eat them. But here in the Chagos, of course, it's uninhabited, and they're fairly plentiful. We can see their nests around us.
This protected island is helping to preserve the coconut crab, a traditional food source for other islands in the Indian Ocean.
Even though the coconut crab can't swim, the female, she's going to have to walk down to the reef flat to release her eggs. And just as for many marine species, the Chagos archipelago is an important stepping stone for organisms such as the coconut crab, because her larvae will drift downstream and replenish islands throughout the Indian Ocean.
The fish survey team, too, is finding that the reefs here can have a large impact beyond their boundaries. The No-Take Marine Protected Area was established in 2010 to help address the problem of overfishing in the Indian Ocean. The team is seeing its effects already. The numbers of iconic regional fish are higher than they used to be. The scientists also record a variety of species in large sizes. The idea behind the protected area is that these fish will spread out to repopulate other parts of the Indian Ocean. But there's one creature that's noticeably scarce, and it worries the fish team.
We certainly expected to see a lot more sharks, because having read papers from 20, 30 years ago, the data suggested they were seeing 20 to 30 sharks per dive. So that has changed considerably. We were averaging maybe 1 or 2 nurse sharks per dive and less than 1 gray reef or silvertip or white tip reef shark per dive, which is pretty disconcerting.
Sharks are long-lived creatures, and the scientists don't expect them to return quickly. But there's another, more serious reason for their concern about the numbers.
Even though it's a marine protected area, there is still poaching of shark fins. We had just heard about a haul which was captured that had, I think it was 12 tons of shark fins. And this is 4 or 5 years after the marine protected area had been established.
The no-take area is rigorously patrolled, and the scientists hope that eventually the shark population will rebound. But right now, the team is much more focused on the problem at hand. In 3 weeks of dives, they've sampled reefs throughout the area. filling in some of the gaps in our understanding of coral science. And what they're finding is that despite widespread bleaching, there is still reason for hope. This optimism rests not on the big predators like the sharks, but on the little fish that graze the reef.
On these reefs, there is always a constant struggle for habitat, for space. There's always a competition between algae, call it seaweed, and corals. And so you have all of these fish on the coral reefs. A lot of them are herbivores, so they eat the algae. And in order for the corals to grow, you need those fish to be the house cleaners.
When reefs are overfished, even the little grazers are taken for food. Without them, the algae win. Baby corals don't stand a chance when algae take over a reef. But even with bleaching, Chagos looks very different.
So amazing here in Chagos, the numbers of fish that are doing this housekeeping is more than I've seen just about anywhere in the world. And so it's this beehive of activity down on the reef.
It's this natural beehive that gives the scientists hope. And there's even more reason for optimism. Major bleaching events have been documented in Chagos several times before, most recently in 2010 and most severely in 1998. But now, the scientists are witnessing something very interesting about the corals that suffered through those events.
On the reefs, we're seeing the cycle of both death and rejuvenation. And there are a lot of these big table corals that have obviously died earlier. But now there's been what they call a recruiting event where coral larvae settle down on these old tables and they start to grow, so it's a rejuvenation of life.
The evidence is clear. Tiny sprigs of new coral are sprouting up on corals given up for dead.
So here's the real takeaway from Chagos, this very isolated place. We're seeing this rejuvenation happen. We're convinced it's because the water quality is real good and it hasn't been overfished and there's natural resilience built into these reefs.
So there is a big lesson in Chagos. But many questions remain. Can the natural resilience in these reefs protect them as climate change accelerates? And what about other coral reefs throughout the world that are bleaching at an alarming rate?
A lot of times the story isn't as wonderful and happy as you would really expect it to be. Our oceans really are in a lot of trouble, specifically our coral reefs and marine fisheries. They're at a tipping point.
We can't control climate cycles like El Niño or other natural factors that, along with climate change, push water temperatures higher and trigger coral bleaching. But we can do something about many of the other factors that imperil our reefs. It's a lesson from paradise, which turns out to be just another part of our world.
The takeaway is if we control a lot of those local stressors, the sedimentation, bad building practices, too much extraction from the reefs, if you can manage that in some of the other reefs of the world, we think it'll build back in the natural resilience to allow these reefs to naturally rejuvenate.
The big test of climate change is yet to come. If coral reefs are going to survive, it's up to us. They've adjusted to what nature has dealt them for hundreds of millions of years. They need our help to respond to what we do to the oceans. Let's give them a fighting chance to survive.